Hey, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Professor Barry here. Um, yeah, week number three. We're kind of this week we're going to getting into defining, explaining what we mean by culture, what we mean by popular culture, and then exploring a few kind of additional ideas about culture that are not covered in the material for this week, which are two podcasts, which I will talk about at the end. So we have three themes this week. Pretty straightforward. Hopefully, you enjoy the assignment, a little bit of application kind of stuff with the assignment. So, just a few quotes to kind of get us started. Pierre Bourdieu, a French theorist, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. The difficulty in sociology is to manage to think in a completely astonished and disconcerted way. So be filled with wonderment, like, man, what's going on? Trying to understand and be disconcerted. So like almost like releasing some of our convictions and suspending our beliefs for a moment and just trying to more objectively analyze and understand um, this, the things that you thought you had always understood. And that gets tricky, right? The things that we're convinced about, that we think we understand, is maybe there's a lot more going on than we are paying attention to or that we are engaging with. So that's for Bourdieu, that's the challenge of sociology, is to be filled with wonder, to sort of suspend maybe some of our preconceived notions and ideas, especially the stuff that we think we understand, and just like, okay, let's look at that. Think about popular culture in a new fundamental way, right? To be astonished, to be like, huh, curious, and sort of to be able to investigate like a journalist would investigate, or someone who's inquisitive, kind of about whatever it is, ranging from biology, physiology, psychology, sociology, study of people and society, whatever it may be. And then poor Pierre Bourdieu also says the function of sociology, as of every science, is to reveal that which is hidden. I think about microbiology. If you've ever taken a microbiology class, you know that world that we don't see, to put it underneath the microscope, so to speak, and be able to see the things that are hidden. They may be actually in our view. They're in our physical environment, but we don't see them. Similar here, thinking about popular culture is to examine popular culture to reveal kind of the underworkings or things that are behind culture and popular culture to better understand this particular field. So, first theme for the week is somewhat straightforward, but it gets really fascinating, I think, in terms of the application and um, it gets you into some really interesting spaces to better understand culture. So we can start off by defining material and non-material culture. So every culture, a culture is reflective, as you'll get into for this week, like defining culture through the podcast, practices, artifacts, the things that are in a physical environment, values, beliefs, ideas, etc., the things that people do. So material culture are the objects that are physical objects. That's material culture. So think about, we examine material culture to understand what's going on in society. For example, there are Bic pens for women. Like that started as a marketing advertising, as a product, I don't know, 10 years ago. So it's like, it's kind of interesting. We have like pens. Why are pens being gendered? We have gendered pens. It's a pen, it's a writing utensil. So if we understand that material culture, we look at that particular material object that can help us to understand kind of what's going on in society itself. Humans are creating culture, creating, excuse me, material culture. And so we can look at the objects that are being created and mass produced from maybe, or maybe being locally produced, and understand values and beliefs and ideas that are behind these particular material objects. Think about the camera. My dad, grew up on a farm in rural Nebraska, but then when he left the farm and started working for a hospital as a radiologist, and then later on worked for a health sciences company, worked in radiology, became an executive in a transnational corporation that worked on a lot of health sciences and film and cameras. So the camera, like if you go back to like 1800s and the development of the camera, early camera, and then just go through different time periods, the development of that material culture, it's an expression of technology, expression of people, expression of wants and desires. There's a lot of things going on there. From a functionalist viewpoint, we could look at material culture as reflecting the needs of people in community and society itself, that it's expressing their common values and ideals, and that material culture is a way of representing kind of collective or the societies or cultures kind of interest. It brings people together, these kind of things. Halloween, a lot of different things with Halloween, decorations, rituals, involvement, but the material culture of the objects themselves. When I was a kid growing up, there were mass-produced costumes. Then we get into sort of mass-produced costumes, and we can look at the costumes themselves. What are the costumes? What do we see? What about the gendered elements of the material culture and the costumes? Like this is where we're going to kind of get into in a way. And then conflict theory is going to be looking at material culture and be wondering or curious about the issues of power and of interests. So how can material culture sometimes be used in a way to reinforce inequality, or maybe comes out of unequal social relationships, that it's being produced and reinforcing inequalities? Giving an example, Spike Lee's film Bamboozled, just a really creative way he puts a story together, kind of a lot about culture and how culture was used as an oppressive mechanism throughout the history of, throughout American history, and a lot of artifacts, a lot of material culture that were racist memorabilia, racist products and ideas, race institutions that were embodying racist ideals, and that became part of culture and society, the water that people swam in at that moment in time. So I don't know, I think it's a really interesting kind of film that can get us assist in thinking about all these different material objects that may circulate around within a culture, that there's a story behind them. Sometimes it's a story of gender, race, class, culture at that particular moment in time, whatever it might be. And then there's non-material culture, which is the laws, the beliefs, the values. And again, you study non-material culture to understand society and culture itself. So, for example, laws around same-sex marriage, domestic partnerships. You look back historically, the movement, the change, what constituted a marriage, who is allowed or who's granted the access to this institution of marriage under what conditions, and sort of we can look at the law and how that law changed over a course of time. It gives us a better understanding of what's going on in society at that particular moment. So that's why we study these things. So to give us better insight into culture, insight into society. Maybe as one last example, it wasn't, until recently within the state of Oregon and I believe New Jersey that people at gas stations, you could not pump your own gas. You had gas station attendants pumping gas. That could have been for different reasons. It became part of the culture of those particular states. That's the non-material culture as far as practices, institutions, and laws. You can study that to just basically try to understand like what's going on within those particular spaces. Now, another thing to consider is this distinction between ideal and practice culture, or ideal and real culture. Again, and I think another fascinating thing to explore. We have ideal culture. Think about it, ideal culture as the culture that we want to be, or that we say that we are, or the culture that we promise to be. It's almost as if, I don't know, maybe back up for a moment. Every institution, organization of a certain size and larger has like a mission statement, a statement of their values, of who they are, what they're doing, what they're accomplishing, who they proclaim to be. Every country, every nation, every culture has an ideal culture, kind of like configuration or an idea of ideal culture. It's the aspirational culture. And then there's the practice culture, like what happens on the ground. And, part of that ideal culture that is there, it's important. It could be a motivating force. It gives direction. It gives reassurance. And then we have the practice culture where we're trying to understand, okay, what's really going on in the world around us? And we can look at and try to understand, okay, what is the ideal culture? What is the ideal culture in the United States at this moment in time? What is the story that we tell about economic success? This sort of ideal culture that is promoted. What is the story we tell? And then what's the practice culture? What's the reality? And if we can understand both of those, and we can understand to what degree is there a distance between those two things, the ideal culture, for example, if you work really hard, you stay morally principled, you have certain values that you will be economically successful. That's the ideal culture that you'll be able to buy a home, afford the niceties of life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the ideal culture. Then we get into the practice culture. Now, the question becomes one is how far apart are those two things, and are they different for different people, different demographics, race, class, gender, for example, and how maybe that difference changes across time. So this kind of an idea, I think we can get into popular culture that a lot of media, for example, can promote very ideal culture kind of components as part of media. Also, maybe revealing like what's really going on as well, practice culture. But it's like getting us into thinking about what are the narratives and what are the stories that are told about that aspirational culture component within a particular society, and then how do we distinguish that between what is actually happening on the ground. Now we get into like a third area, our final theme, which is a little bit different than the first two. The first one, we're just kind of like laying out sort of the idea of non-material, material culture, moving into ideal versus practice culture. Now we think about culture and its movement across time and place. Cultural diffusion, so how culture moves from place to other. People, when they move, when they immigrate, when they migrate, they bring culture with them, and then culture gets diffused into this new location. So, for example, what's called the Great Migration during World War I, all the way through World War II, African Americans leaving the South, migrating from the South, the Great Migration, ending up going to city centers, places like Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City, for example. And these were places that when African Americans were migrating from the South, moving north, seeking occupations, seeking to leave behind a system of Jim Crow South and oppressive racial segregation and racial inequalities. Not that they weren't there in the North, but kind of the desire, the promise of being in this different space. There's a reason why we have the Chicago blues and we have the St. Louis blues and the Kansas City blues, different style of blues. That's part because there's a diffusion going on that African Americans were migrating to the South, bringing culture with them to this new place, and culture becomes diffused. Think about like, just like the foods that we have in our community, tacos or ethnic foods, that's about story of diffusion of food or practices that happen. So interesting to follow, like the diffusion of culture. Um, Baseball in the Caribbean nations, baseball in Japan. How did baseball get diffused to Japan? There's a story to be told with that. And then cultural leveling is this concept that more and more places are becoming more and more similar or leveled. So for example, you travel around the United States, and most cities of a certain size and larger, you find very similar architecture, design, big box stores, Home Depot, Lowe's. Even they're always like right next to each other, or near each other. There's like these things that are like very similar, Starbucks, McDonald's, fast food, all kinds of other enterprises, that more and more spaces are becoming more and more similar across a particular nation or even across the globe. So it's this issue of cultural leveling. So some of that distinction between cultures and nations is decreasing over time, and more places are becoming more similar. Of course, we're gonna be able to find in certain places around the globe where they're still quite distinct and different. But there's this sort of leveling that's going on. A little bit different than diffusion. So, for example, I remember years ago, our first travel to Spain, and went to Hard Rock Cafe. Somebody, now I'm just guessing here, somebody, it could be, this would be a diffusion element. Somebody traveled from Spain, traveled to the United States, saw and enjoyed Hard Rock Cafe, decided they wanted to bring that back to Spain, and they brought that back to Spain. That's diffusion. Um, It'd be more leveling if the enterprise of Hard Rock Cafe is being found in more places around the country, around the globe, and things are becoming more similar. So maybe like a little bit of nuance going on there. Diffusion is a result of the movement of people. Leveling is things becoming more similar. And then imperialism is the domination of another place or an aspect of culture. It's a domination through industries that are extending their power through different mechanisms. Um, so, like, for example, that Hard Rock Cafe or Starbucks or McDonald's or whatever it may be is imperializing, trying to take over the economy or take over markets within a particular location. They're trying to dominate and maybe using the government and other institutions in order to be able to facilitate that. The NFL, National Football League, is currently trying to expand markets in Europe and expand markets in Central America. This is more of a cultural imperialist kind of effort of trying to dominate, markets in other places around the world. So it's cultural, we call it cultural imperialism. We could make this link maybe to cultural appropriation, a topic we'll talk more about next week. But looking at history of music is often a history of appropriation of a music form existing in a particular group of people, a particular subculture gets kind of discovered by industries. Industries are grab onto that particular music form, knowing that they could capitalize that, turn it into a different kind of market, bring it to the marketplace, and make a profit out of that. This is going to be more of an imperialistic kind of effort. And then one concept you're going to get into in the podcast this week is a concept called hegemony. We talked about it before, this idea of domination by consent, or this issue, what the in the podcast they talk about this issue of soft power. So when American films, things like, and even like American enterprises like Disneyland are going to different places around the globe, that it's a dominant form of media consumption or a dominant form of entertainment. It's not. So what also is happening is a form of soft power. There's values and beliefs that are behind these products or these films that are embedded in them, and people in those different countries that these products are placed are being influenced by them to some degree and being influenced in ways that benefit the dominating country. So this is like an issue of what we call soft power. Yeah, so for the content for this week, I think two podcasts from this website called The Social Breakdown. There are interviews or discussions between three sociologists, PhD students, and they have a catalog of podcasts if you're interested. Pretty entertaining. They do a really nice job breaking down concepts and ideas, having fun with them, engaging in a dialogue, a discussion. And for the assignment this week, just kind of interested in identifying, X number of things, 5 things, I think it is, 5 things for me that you found interesting, fascinating, important, valuable, and then providing some explanation of what you found valuable, interesting, and important about those 5 things, 5 for each. All right, so that's a little bit of overview of culture, kind of thinking about these ideas of culture, just trying to expand our understanding of culture, trying to identify in the podcast what is popular culture and how do we think about it. I think that'll get us pretty well grounded in these concepts, and then we'll move on to a different topic next week. Hope everything's going well, and as always, keep me posted if you have questions. I'm here to support you in any way that I can throughout the course. So yeah, with that, have a great rest of your day.